Alan Dershowitz walked into the MSNBC studio like a man who had carried the weight of the law on his shoulders for nearly a century. 85 years of life, decades of courtroom battles, lectures at Harvard, and high-profile cases seemed to echo in every step he took. The studio lights reflected off his polished shoes, but it was the smirk on his face that drew all the attention. It wasn't just a smile, it was the expression of a man convinced he had already won before the debate even began. His eyes carried the confidence of someone who had intimidated students, judges, and even presidents. To him, this was just another day, another opportunity to remind the world that Alan Dershowitz was still the authority on the Constitution. But beneath that confident gaze, there was something else the audience couldn't yet see, the storm that was waiting to break. The air in America was thick with tension. Across the country, people were arguing, sometimes shouting about voting rights, racial justice, and what equal protection under the law really means. Courtrooms were overflowing, protests filled the streets, and the evening news played clips of lawmakers sparring like it was a heavyweight fight. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was personal. Communities of color felt their voices being silenced by new voting restrictions. Civil rights advocates warned that history was repeating itself. Meanwhile, defenders of the laws insisted they were protecting election integrity. The nation was divided not just by ideology, but by lived experience. And right in the middle of this storm stood Alan Dershowitz, the 85-year-old Harvard law professor, whose name had long been synonymous with constitutional authority. On the other side sat Jasmine Crockett, a 42-year-old freshman congresswoman from Texas, a former civil rights attorney who had fought these very battles in real courtrooms. Millions tuned into MSNBC that night expecting a masterclass, a seasoned legal titan schooling an inexperienced politician. To many it felt inevitable. Alan Dershowitz would lecture, Jasmine Crockett would listen, and the world would applaud his genius. At least that's what everyone thought. What the audience didn't know, what even Alan Dershowitz couldn't have imagined, was that his opponent was ready. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a freshman congresswoman from Texas. She was a former civil rights attorney who had spent years in the trenches fighting for communities the law often forgot. She had defended voters whose rights were stripped away, stood beside families crushed by systemic injustice, and faced down police brutality cases that other lawyers had called impossible. This debate wasn't just theory for her. It was personal. For weeks, her team had dug through Dershowitz's entire career, every op-ed, every court brief, every TV appearance. They built a war chest of receipts, the contradictions, the reversals, the moments where his principles bent under pressure. But more than preparation, Jasmine carried something Alan didn't: lived experience. She didn't learn constitutional law from the ivory towers of academia alone. She learned it from courtrooms full of real people, where voting rights weren't talking points, they were lifelines. And that's why, under the bright lights of MSNBC, Jasmine sat silent, calm, and perfectly still, like a predator waiting for the exact moment to strike. Alan Dershowitz leaned forward, resting his elbows lightly on the desk, and when he spoke, his tone carried the weight of Harvard lecture halls and decades of courtroom prestige. "Let me explain." He began, his voice slow, deliberate, the voice of a man used to being the smartest person in every room. "I've been arguing constitutional law since before Congresswoman Crockett was even born." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a gauntlet thrown to the floor. For him, this wasn't just a debate. It was a classroom. And Jasmine Crockett, in his eyes, she wasn't an equal. She was a student, someone here to be taught, corrected, even put in her place. You see, he continued adjusting his tie with practiced ease. Constitutional interpretation is not about feelings or slogans. It's about history, about precedent, about understanding nuanced things that require real-world experience. The implication was unmistakable. To the audience, he didn't need to say it outright, "I have it." She doesn't. It was the kind of opening blow that had intimidated senators, humbled governors, and silenced even presidents. But tonight, he wasn't facing any of them. He was facing Jasmine Crockett. And beneath her calm expression, something sharp was waiting. The camera panned slowly across the studio, catching glimpses of faces in the audience. Raised eyebrows, tightened jaws, and the kind of silence that feels louder than words. Andrea Mitchell, the seasoned MSNBC host, shifted slightly in her seat. For someone who had moderated some of the nation's most heated debates, this silence was different. It wasn't the expectant hush of an audience waiting for fireworks. It was the uncomfortable stillness of people sensing imbalance. Some viewers leaned back, arms folded tightly as if bracing themselves. Others exchanged uneasy glances, whispering without sound. They could feel it. Alan Dershowitz wasn't just making a point, he was dismissing Jasmine Crockett before she'd even spoken. And that landed differently in a country already boiling over debates about race, power, and justice. The studio lights suddenly felt harsher, the air thicker. Every camera operator, every sound engineer seemed frozen, as though instinctively holding their breath. For a brief, fragile moment, it felt like time itself had paused. Everyone sensed it. The balance of this debate was shifting. And though nobody knew it yet, the weight of that silence was about to break violently. This wasn't just a debate. It was a generational clash, a collision between the old guard and a rising new power. On one side sat Alan Dershowitz, 85 years old, a man who had built his reputation inside marble courtrooms and ivy-covered lecture halls. For decades, his words shaped constitutional thought. Presidents consulted him, Supreme Court justices quoted him. To many, his name carried the weight of untouchable authority. On the other side was Jasmine Crockett, 42 years old, part of a new generation of leaders who weren't defined by titles or ivory towers. She carried scars from the real fight, battling voter suppression, confronting police brutality, and defending communities left behind by the very system Dershowitz had long interpreted from a distance. This was more than theory versus theory. This was the lived law versus the lectured law. The old guard came armed with prestige, tradition, and credentials. The new blood came armed with receipts, lived experience, and relentless preparation. And deep down, the audience could feel it. This wasn't going to be the kind of lesson Dershowitz thought it would be. Something bigger was unfolding, a quiet revolution where the past and the future of American justice were about to collide under the studio lights. The room shifted, and no one could explain why. Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly in front of her. She hadn't spoken a word yet. She didn't need to. Her silence said more than any argument could. Then slowly she smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't polite. It was the razor-thin smile of a prosecutor who knows exactly where the trap is and exactly when to spring it. Across the table, Alan Dershowitz didn't notice it at first. He was still speaking, still lecturing, still confident that the narrative belonged to him. But in the audience, something was changing. People leaned forward. Camera operators adjusted their angles. Andrea Mitchell, the host, glanced sideways as if sensing a storm gathering on the horizon. This wasn't the smile of someone intimidated. This was the smile of someone holding the ace, waiting for the perfect moment to play it. For the first time since the debate began, the power in the room quietly shifted, and Alan Dershowitz had no idea. The moment came without warning. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward slightly, her calm, steady voice cutting through the studio like a blade. Professor Dershowitz, I've read your arguments in Davidson v. Miller, 1998 Pennsylvania voter ID laws. Alan froze. Just for a second, but the cameras caught it. You argued, she continued, her tone razor-sharp yet controlled. The 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause must be read in light of its historical purpose, to ensure that all Americans have equal access to the democratic process. The room went silent. Andrea Mitchell's eyebrows shot up. A few audience members audibly gasped. Even the sound engineers stopped moving their hands, hovering over dials. Jasmine let the words hang there, unhurried, deliberate. And then she leaned in just a little more, her gaze locked on Dershowitz like a hawk on its prey. So, Professor, are you now arguing against your own precedent? That was it. One question, sharp, surgical, impossible to dodge. Alan blinked. His lips parted, but no words came out. The confident smirk, the professorial authority, the weight of decades of credentials, it all faltered in that single heartbeat, and the audience knew it. This wasn't just a counterpoint. This was the first crack in the armor of a giant. The silence in the studio was absolute, and then it shattered. Gasps rippled through the audience, sharp and sudden, like a wave crashing against stone. Some covered their mouths. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances, as if silently asking the same question. Did she really just say that? The camera zoomed in on Alan Dershowitz's face. The confident smirk that had carried him through decades of televised debates was gone. In its place was something far rarer, hesitation. His jaw tightened. A bead of sweat caught the studio light. His hands shifted slightly on the desk, the smallest betrayal of a man suddenly unsure. Andrea Mitchell, the MSNBC host, blinked twice, her mouth parted just slightly, but no words came. She wasn't moderating anymore. She was witnessing a moment she knew would be replayed across millions of screens before midnight. Behind the cameras, even the crew froze. You could hear the faint hum of the lights overhead, the clicking of a single camera adjusting focus. Every sound felt louder, sharper, heavier. It wasn't just what Jasmine Crockett had said, it was what she'd unleashed. For the first time, the audience sensed it. The giant had been struck. And then the avalanche began. Jasmine Crockett opened her folder, her fingers gliding over neatly prepared tabs. Her voice was calm, steady, and razor-sharp. Professor, in 1998, during the Clinton impeachment hearings, you argued passionately that no president is above the law, that the Constitution demands accountability, even at the highest level. Alan's jaw tightened, but she didn't give him a chance to respond. But in 2020, during the Trump impeachment, you said the exact opposite, that a president cannot be criminally prosecuted while in office. A murmur rippled through the audience. Cameras zoomed in closer. So tell me, Professor, does the Constitution change depending on who's sitting in the Oval Office? Alan inhaled sharply, but Jasmine kept going, flipping to the next tab. In 2007, when the Bush administration claimed broad executive privilege, you warned that it was dangerous, even called it an abuse of presidential power. But in 2019, when the Trump administration made the same claim, you defended it on national television. By now, the tension in the studio was suffocating. You could hear a pin drop. Jasmine leaned in, slightly locking eyes with him. And finally, let's talk voting rights. In 1995, you wrote that restricting ballot access is fundamentally un-American, but just last year, you went on Fox News and called voter ID laws necessary to protect election integrity. She let the words hang sharp as glass. Professor, she said softly, which version of you are we supposed to believe? Alan blinked. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The audience knew exactly what they were watching. This wasn't just a debate anymore. This was a dismantling, brick by brick, contradiction by contradiction. Every precedent Jasmine cited was like a carefully knotted rope. One by one, she tightened the noose. Her voice remained steady, her tone razor-sharp. Professor, are we to believe that your interpretation of constitutional law conveniently changes depending on who benefits? The studio fell silent. Dershowitz shifted in his chair, his fingers tapping nervously against the armrest. For decades, he had commanded every room he walked into. Tonight, for the first time, he looked cornered. Andrea Mitchell glanced between them, her pen frozen mid-note. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Viewers at home could feel it too, the sense that something irreversible was unfolding live in real time. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low but cutting through the silence like glass. You don't have constitutional principles. You have constitutional positions for hire. For a split second, the studio froze. Then, gasp. The audience erupted with a wave of disbelief. Andrea Mitchell's jaw dropped slightly, her pen sliding from her hand. Even the camera operator hesitated, zooming in on Dershowitz's face as the color drained from it. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Within minutes, the clip would explode across social media. Positions for hire would trend #1 on Twitter. Late-night hosts would replay it in slow motion, and constitutional law professors from Yale to Berkeley would analyze it frame by frame. This wasn't just a soundbite. It was a cultural earthquake. America wasn't just watching a debate anymore. It was witnessing the downfall of a legal giant live. The camera locked on Dershowitz's face. His jaw, clenched cheeks, flushed crimson. For the first time in decades of televised debates, the professor of professors looked cornered. He leaned toward the mic, clearing his throat. This is unfair, completely unfair. His voice cracked on the second unfair. He repeated the word again, softer this time, like an echo of authority slowly fading. But when Andrea Mitchell gently asked Professor which part of her argument is inaccurate, silence. Dershowitz blinked. His hands shuffled the stack of papers in front of him, anything to buy time, but the counter-argument never came. The professor who once demolished senators on live TV was outmaneuvered by a freshman congresswoman. In that silence, the power dynamic flipped. The studio froze. For the first time in his storied career, Alan Dershowitz, the man whose voice once shook Senate chambers, sat there speechless. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. The weight of decades of authority crumbled beneath the studio lights. Andrea Mitchell glanced at the audience, sensing the shift. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Phones stopped buzzing. Even the producers behind the cameras leaned forward as if afraid they'd missed the moment a Harvard legend fell. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply waited, her silence louder than any argument. It wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a passing of the torch. Somewhere deep inside that silence, America realized the old guard had been broken. This wasn't just the end of an argument, it was the collapse of an era. Alan Dershowitz didn't just lose to Jasmine Crockett, he lost to something far greater, the relentless weight of lived truth. For decades, Dershowitz's authority came from his books, his lectures, his name etched into Harvard's halls. But in this studio, under these lights, none of that mattered. He was beaten not by louder words, but by deeper experience. Jasmine didn't fight him with status or prestige. She fought him with the scars of courtrooms, with the stories of voters silenced, with the raw, unpolished truth of America's racial and constitutional struggles. The old guard, polished, untouchable, insulated, had just been dismantled in 7 minutes. And in that moment, millions watching from home understood this wasn't about Harvard versus Congresswoman Crockett. It was about the people versus power, and for once, power blinked. The show wasn't even off the air yet when the internet detonated. Within minutes, the 30-second clip of Jasmine Crockett's knockout line, "You don't have constitutional principles, you have constitutional positions for hire," was everywhere. Twitter, no X, turned into a war zone. Memes, hot takes, and think pieces flooded timelines. One viral edit showed Dershowitz's face slowly dissolving into sand with the caption, "Harvard can't save you now." TikTok stitched reaction videos, teenagers, lawyers, even retired judges, all replaying the moment in slow motion, lip-syncing Jasmine's line. Instagram reels blasted compilations of Dershowitz, old interviews juxtaposed with Crockett's receipts. The hashtag, "Principles over Prestige," skyrocketed, climbing to 1 worldwide within an hour. By midnight, over 40 million views and counting. Cable pundits scrambled to rewrite their segments. Podcasts recorded emergency episodes. Even law schools updated their syllabi overnight to include the Crockett-Dershowitz exchange. This wasn't just trending. This was a cultural reset. The shockwaves didn't stop at social media. They rattled the ivory towers. Within days, top law schools, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Georgetown, started uploading the 30-second clip into their constitutional law lectures. Professors paused mid-lesson, pulling it up on the big screen. Watch carefully. This is how precedent is weaponized. Suddenly, students were quoting Crockett in class debates, dissecting her strategy line by line. Entire threads popped up on academic forums analyzing her rhetorical precision and cross-examination style. One viral tweet from a Yale law student summed it up: "Dershowitz taught our professors. Crockett just taught us how to beat him." By the end of the week, law school memes crowned Jasmine Crockett the professor's professor. And that's when it hit everyone. This wasn't just a TV moment. It was a seismic shift in legal culture. A new generation was rising, and she had just become their case study. The aftershocks didn't stop at academia. Washington felt it too. For decades, Alan Dershowitz had been the legal oracle for presidents, senators, and Supreme Court watchers. His words carried weight in policy debates. But after that 30-second clip went viral, his aura of invincibility cracked. Think tanks stopped quoting him. Cable networks quietly replaced him with fresh voices. Even former allies began to whisper, "Maybe Alan's time is over." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's stock soared. Suddenly, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Congressional committees wanted her on panels dissecting executive power. Civil rights groups invited her to keynote their conferences. Late-night hosts joked that she just bench-pressed Harvard Law on live TV. Within weeks, Crockett became the face of a rising generation of lawyers who weren't afraid to call out hypocrisy even when it wore a Harvard robe. One Politico headline summed it up perfectly from freshman to firebrand: "Jasmine Crockett redefines power." What had started as a televised debate was now shaping the political landscape. In the end, this clash wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about what justice really means. Justice isn't found in textbooks, ivory towers, or even the loudest voices on cable news. It isn't measured by titles, prestige, or age. Justice lives in consistency, the courage to stand by your principles when the room turns hostile. Justice thrives on integrity, the refusal to bend the truth for power or profit. And justice demands fearlessness to speak when silence would be safer. That night, Jasmine Crockett reminded the nation, the Constitution doesn't belong to Harvard. It belongs to the people brave enough to defend it. In one debate, she didn't just dismantle Dershowitz's arguments. She restored faith that even in a cynical age, principles still matter. This moment wasn't just about law or politics. It struck a deeper chord one that resonates with everyone who's ever been underestimated. For the young professional told that they're too inexperienced to have a voice. For the woman dismissed because this is a man's game. For people of color told subtly or bluntly that power isn't theirs to claim. Jasmine Crockett's stand became their stand. Her composure, her relentless logic, and her refusal to be silenced showed millions something profound. The truth doesn't care about your racism. It doesn't care about your gender. It doesn't care about your skin color. This wasn't just a debate on live television. It was a mirror reflecting back to an entire generation, the belief that justice isn't inherited, it's earned, defended, and demanded. For every person who has ever been told to wait their turn, this was proof that your turn is now if you're brave enough to take it. If arrogance can collapse in just 30 seconds, what might happen if more voices refuse to stay silent? What if young lawyers everywhere demanded consistency from power? What if women across every courtroom, boardroom, and Congress floor spoke with this same unshakable clarity? What if truth stopped bowing to titles and principles outweighed prestige? Maybe we'd see fewer untouchable giants and more ordinary people rising to reshape the system. Jasmine Crockett's victory isn't just hers. It's a question to all of us. How much longer will we let power go unchallenged? And when your moment comes, will you stay quiet? Or will you stand in a world where power and prestige often seem untouchable? The showdown between Jasmine Crockett and Alan Dershowitz reminds us of a timeless truth: justice doesn't live in books, titles, or age. It lives in consistency, courage, and unshakable principles. Dershowitz had decades of experience, a Harvard legacy, and shelves of legal victories. Yet in just 30 seconds of undeniable truth and fearless resolve, Crockett exposed contradictions that toppled a legend on live television. This isn't just one woman's victory. It's a reminder that anyone can stand up to injustice, no matter how powerful the opposition may seem. If you believe truth deserves to be heard, if you believe principles matter more than privilege, if you believe no one stands above justice, subscribe now to discover powerful, inspiring stories. Relive historic moments where truth defeats power. Join a growing community that dares to speak up. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because your voice matters, and together we create change.